This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 193 of the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network. Most people agree that the online learning that happened during COVID was a challenge for many students, especially those with disabilities. However, what happened during the pandemic wasn't a true version of what distance learning or telehealth should be. There's a difference between leveraging technology to enhance in-person experiences versus using it as a temporary solution in an emergency situation. There's also a difference between using technology to provide opportunities that wouldn't be possible in person versus having an unhealthy relationship with social media. That's why I invited Seth Fleischauer to De Facto Leaders to discuss distance learning best practices, social media, and how to use technology responsibly in education. Seth Fleischauer is the president of Banyan Global Learning, which he founded in 2008 after teaching elementary school with NYC Teaching Fellows. Banyan pioneered daily international EFL distance learning and has since expanded to train teachers and educate K-12 students across 3 continents. His programs focus on teaching digital and cultural competencies through a global lens and have delivered over 40,000 live teaching sessions. Seth has also hosted nearly 100 podcast episodes, including Make It Mindful and Why Distance Learning. In this conversation, we discuss why COVID online learning wasn't an accurate representation of true distance learning, opportunities, access, and equity, using distance learning experiences when IRL isn't possible, how do we know when kids are ready for social media, and defining the digital footprint and how to talk to kids about safe online practices. Before we get going, I wanted to remind you to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, my program for related service providers that helps them put executive functioning support and programming in place in collaboration with their school teams. When we're thinking about executive functioning, there is certainly a place for direct therapy services. We can certainly leverage the group therapy sessions or the online therapy sessions, or even the classroom-based instruction that they're having. But we need to take it a step further and think about the big picture. Because if all we're doing is giving kids academic experiences and teaching them in that format without real-life application, kids are not going to learn to engage in less structured situations that are going to prepare them for real life. This means that if you are in a related service provider role, you need to think about direct intervention, but you also need to think bigger picture about the programming that's happening for your students. And you can do that even if you aren't in an official administrative position. That's what I help you do in the School of Clinical Leadership. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkaren.dudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Now, please enjoy this conversation with Seth Fleischauer.
Today, I am joined by Seth Fleischauer from Banyan Global Learning, host of the Make It Mindful podcast and host of the Why Distance Learning podcast. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being on.
Yeah, so I know we had a lot of different topics we wanted to talk about today, but I think the best place to start is just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing now. And then I would love to hear about the podcast, because I know you've had a lot of amazing guests.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Seth Fleischauer. Banyan Global Learning is the company that I founded and I've been running for the past 16 years. We have a daily distance learning program that we deliver to clients in Asia that teaches in the areas of culture, language, and technology, and is an opportunity for them to apply their English skills. So they like learn the foundational skills somewhere else, and then they apply them in our classes. It's also an opportunity for them to engage with the world, and that's something that we also brought domestically, where we have live virtual programs that we deliver to schools and different educational groups that help connect them to people outside of their geographic bubble. It is all about cultural and digital competencies through a global lens. We've thought a lot about digital competencies and digital citizenship. That's a big thing I've talked about a lot on both my podcasts. Make It Mindful is a podcast that is all about applying a mindfulness lens to education. So really, it's just an opportunity to kind of take a step back, be a little bit more objective about what we're seeing, and make some conclusions around what is important and how we can translate that into practical, transformative solutions for teaching. And then why distance learning is a question that I have been asked many, many times throughout my career since I started a distance learning program in 2008. Why distance learning? Why not just have a
Hmm.
teacher in the classroom?
Hmm.
And the answer to that question really is about access. It's about creating access to things that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, and thus expanding the educational possibilities within any given classroom. And the reason we started the podcast, I started it with a couple of people from the Center for Interactive Learning and Collaboration, CILC.org, is because when the pandemic happened, uh, the entire world suddenly pivoted to this medium that I had known as this like niche little corner of the educational
Hmm.
industry,
Yeah.
and you know it was a triage situation. It was really difficult for teachers to take what they were doing in the classroom and then all of a sudden have to do it online with
Hmm.
very little training and really very little like purpose, besides we're just going to keep doing this until we're asked to not do it anymore. So that was another thing, is that people weren't like investing in the
Yeah.
idea of getting better at it, because any given day could have been their last day doing it. And
Yeah.
they were struggling through a pandemic personally. So
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. And so a lot of people, I think, rightfully had a perceived distance learning to be bad, right? To be ineffective.
Yeah.
And what was unfortunate for people like me and my co-hosts is that there's a whole industry behind distance learning that's been there for a really long time.
Yeah.
What we experience during emergency response is not distance learning. And those best practices, those opportunities are well worn, well researched, used by a small population of people who are extremely enthusiastic about it because they've seen what it can do for classrooms. And so this podcast, Why Distance Learning, is all about debunking that myth that
Hmm.
what we all experienced during the pandemic is distance learning. Rather, here's this whole world out there, and won't you take a look?
Yeah. That's really interesting that you said you thought it was this little niche corner, or some people were doing it beforehand, and then all of a sudden everyone was doing it, but it was
Oh man,
just,
it was wild.
yeah. Well, and I actually had, I have distance learning that I created and that I offer to people. And I was doing it before the pandemic. And so it was really interesting how a lot of people, and for me specifically, it was all about teletherapy because a lot of people
Mm,
were doing online speech therapy. And so I offer a course where there's therapy materials. And so a lot of the people that were in my programs, many of them were using it in person, but then some were already using it for teletherapy. So when we had to switch over to the pandemic, people were like, well, can you use your course via teletherapy? And I was like, yeah, people are already doing that. And yes, I did make some
mm,
adjustments to make it even more accessible or obvious, or just point out that it was already something that we could do for, because I think some people, if they don't do it all the time, like you said, there's best practices to doing anything online, whether it's telehealth or whether it's learning for a classroom, there are best practices. And if you weren't doing that already, you wouldn't necessarily know what those things are. I had just really interesting conversations around best practices for teletherapy that
Mm.
weren't inherently obvious to people, but yeah, so that was definitely an interesting transition for people who are providing therapy services as well. And I think that the ethical the ethical standard is that you do it when you can provide services that are either equivalent or better than you could in person. That's really the standard for teletherapy of whether or not it's appropriate. And a lot of times it's because there's people who can't find SLPs in a rural district. And so they have to
Hmm.
use a teaching assistant and an online therapist because it's either this or nothing. So the access is important as well. But I think with learning, it's different. So what are some of those best practices that are things that people didn't necessarily know how to do when the pandemic hit?
Yeah, I think that it kind of depends on which part of distance learning you're talking about, but
Yeah.
most of what happened during the pandemic was this, live video conferencing,
Mm-hmm.
which is a world that we are in. One of the big things that people didn't quite get was the attention span issue that
Yes,
that
totally.
when we generally say if you have 7 minutes in a classroom before you're going to lose your students, you probably have three in a distance
Mm-hmm.
learning classroom, and so you just got
Mm-hmm.
to roll things over quickly. And we talk about having different modes of presentation and different inputs because the white noise effect can really can become an issue very quickly in the online classroom, where if you just are listening to the same voice talk in especially a digitally compressed voice,
Yeah.
we're used to a screen having, one character say one thing and then another character says another thing, and then there's a loud boom
Mm-hmm.
and then everyone runs, and it's like these exciting things that happen online, and now all of a sudden it's like the drone of a teacher who's been talking for 15 minutes straight
Mm-hmm.
and forgot to like ask the students a question. So there's th- that like interactive piece is critical, but also if you do have to present information, to present it in a number of different kinds of ways so that you are not falling into the trap of like talking head, just
Mm-hmm.
repeatedly saying something so that people are zoning out. And that is true, from kindergarten, which all the way up to high school. Now, the kindergartners are the ones I feel the worst for, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, there are reasons to feel bad for many different age
Right.
groups
Yeah. I
within
mean,
the
I know that
pandemic,
kids
but
were getting special ed. That was they took a big, it was challenging for a lot of students that needed services, especially if attention was impacted. I
yeah.
know that was really challenging for parents as well. So,
Yeah, yeah, and you're in a situation where they've got their entire bedroom slash house to be distracted
hmm
by,
hmm
but they're also like they don't know what school is, right? Like these are people who like have
the
never had,
kindergartners.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
I
kindergartners had
know.
never had school before, and then they're supposed to like sit quietly now in this place where like a lot of these teachers, again, I don't blame them, like they're going through their stuff. Um, did not have the like wherewithal to create something engaging, right? Like they were trying to like do what they were doing in the classroom. And there's a certain amount of um like social awareness that I feel like by the time even a 5-year-old gets into the classroom, they understand that if they're in a space and someone's talking, that like that person is probably the person that they should be looking at. Obviously, there are plenty of exceptions to
Right. Yeah.
to
Many
that
times
rule,
we
but
have to directly teach that and
sure,
reinforce it. But
sure,
yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But there is kind of that like kind of social pressure,
hmm
right? And
Yeah.
that just isn't the case online, right? Like you're especially if you're like one tiny square out of 20 squares, and I mean those are some of the like the basics. There's also this sense of like what can you leverage this medium for rather than let me just replicate exactly what I was doing in the classroom and try to adapt it so that now it's online.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, you can start to think about like what are some like video assets that I can bring in now that we are in a video based medium.
Mm-hmm.
Where are some places that I can go and do 5 minutes from my kitchen instead of from my home office, right? Like, how can I get creative in terms of who else I'm inviting to my classroom? Because all of a sudden, they don't have to actually be here with me. They can just be on the call with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's where that's the kind of like, level 201 kind of
Yeah.
application is like, let's lean into the medium and let's design some experiences leveraging the medium that will redefine what we're actually learning. And some of those experiences are the ones that we've built and that we provide to classrooms. And when it's done right, it is exciting, it's engaging, and it's something that they are that broadens perspectives because they don't have access to it otherwise.
So this would be they're at an in-person school, but then some of their learning is done via distance learning. Is that how what you do would work? Like, so what
Yeah,
would be an example of something that you would offer?
yeah, we first of all, it can work in a lot of different ways. We can
Mm-hmm.
do the like, 30 squares on a Zoom call teaching. We can also beam into a school, be on a large screen in front of the room and interact with them that way. That was one of the blessings of the pandemic for distance learning is that all of a sudden everyone had the tech figured out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A big yeah, obstacle before the pandemic was that like a lot of teachers just didn't know how to open a Zoom call, but problem
Mm-hmm.
solved there. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Oh yeah, for sure. Even
uh,
my
so
parents know how to use Zoom now.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. Amazing once something becomes a necessity, how everyone can figure out how to do it. So examples of things that we do, and I should say that we are in the process of redesigning a lot of our live virtual programs for schools. We have up until this point operate in kind of three distinct buckets of content. SEL was one that was really needed right as the pandemic was starting. At this
Mm-hmm.
point, it's been integrated into the approach to the extent that it's not really in demand anymore because we are people that you bring in if you don't otherwise have it going on. It's actually
Mm-hmm.
still in demand in Canada, which is weird because Canada, I don't know if they
Interesting.
weren't as messed up as we were, but like there's still like it's like the
Yeah.
guidance counselor is still the person who's responsible for teaching SEL to everyone
Right.
in the entire
Rather than
school.
it being like a standard tier one
Yeah,
intervention.
exactly, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in America,
Or
it feels like we kind of figured that part out. At least in some places. In other places, they don't call it SEL. They probably still do it though. But and then with so SEL is one of the buckets. Digital citizenship is another bucket, and we have programs where we are talking about digital footprints, and we've got puppets that we bring on, and there's a whole narrative, and the kids are kind of practicing some of the skills that maybe they learned in the classroom when they were studying digital citizenship, and then our program is an opportunity for them to apply some of those skills, and they apply it to the story that we're putting in front of them. And then we also have global citizenship trips. So one of the ones, our most popular trips is a trip to the Taiwanese night market. Our students for our daily distance learning program in Asia, they are in Taiwan. So we've been over to Taiwan many times. We know the culture very well. Night markets are one of the real kind of shining beacons of culture within Taiwan. If you go to Taiwan, go to a night market. It's awesome. It's very colorful. It really like portrays a lot of rich, deep, nuanced cultural elements. And so we have a trip that is based around those video assets of people walking through the night market and starting to tease out, depending on the age of the students, some simple things about culture like food and colors and language, but then some more complicated things about culture for older students, like what are some of the assumptions that we see here? What are some of the like rules of behavior that we can observe? And the whole idea with with learning about other cultures is that it's a great mirror, and it's a great window. It's also a sliding door. I've heard that as well. Like you can open the window to kind of jump through. But if you can learn about other cultures, if you can see what is the same and what is different about them, inevitably you are comparing that to your own experience, and you're starting to be able to piece together your own cultural identity. And we all have them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that you might not be very aware of if you never communicate with anyone or are exposed to anything outside of your geographic bubble, especially as things get more kind of homogeneous within those geographic bubbles within America. As I said, though, we're starting to embark on a new round of programs where we kind of blend all these things together. Our idea is that the line between digital life and real life is pretty darn fuzzy
Yeah.
for young people,
Mm-hmm.
especially.
Yeah.
You're someone I've talked to now, what, 4 times? So yeah, so here you are
Yeah.
in a Midwest state. I cannot even know what state you're from,
Right. And we've
and still
talked
have
a
a
few
relationship
times. Yeah,
with you, right? So like, I
exactly.
mean, it's beautiful. It's amazing because you for because of what you grew up around, because of your current cultural surroundings, you're going to have a different perspective on certain things than I am. And so being able to connect and have these conversations that we've been having, it personally has been extremely fulfilling for me. And so being able to provide those types of opportunities for students, whether you are connecting to their peers or connecting to cultural locations around the US, let alone around the world, because we have a vast array of cultures within the United States, is an opportunity for us to prepare our students for this fuzzy line between real life and digital life, where the people that they're going to interact with that are different from them are probably going to be interacting with them digitally more than they are IRL. Again, because of
Yeah.
kind of that bias that we have to sort of seek out people that are the same, the geographic homogeneity that has started to come up in America, where people feel, they just want to move somewhere where politically aligned with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to like navigate the digital world is navigating cross culturally, and there are global skills that come into that as well. So we're designing trips that kind of speak to all of them at the same time.
So when you say digital citizenship, it's just that ability to interact with different people online, or what do you how do you define the digital footprint when you explain that to kids? And well, I guess how would you explain that to adults too?
Yeah, so that's so three questions there. So
Hmm. Yeah.
so digital citizenship, we think of it as staying safe and building community online. So it's not
Hmm.
just about how to talk to people, but
Hmm.
it's also about like there are some real actual dangers out there, whether they
Yeah.
be dangers born of other people or dangers born of the technology itself.
Hmm.
And when we talk to, so in terms of digital footprint, a digital footprint is like what you post and put out
Hmm.
there online,
Yeah.
and how that can be forever. Actually, there's kind of an evolving conversation around that, because initially when we were teaching about digital citizenship and digital footprints, it's almost like fear mongering with kids, where you're like, this is going to be there forever, like make sure you
Yeah.
don't mess it up, kids. And
Yeah.
what that ended up doing to this generation of kids, and this is a short generation, right? This is only the last 10 years we've had social media, we've even started to have these conversations, but that extreme fear mongering around it actually resulted in some extreme reactions from students if something about them went out
Mm.
on the internet. This feeling that, if God forbid, there's some kind of like sexting thing, or,
Yeah.
something
Hmm.
compromising about you that's out on the internet. They've been hearing from adults that the internet is forever. And so
Hmm.
this pain that they're feeling about this thing that happened to them, this thing that's out there, now feels like it's forever.
Hmm.
So we have to be a little bit more nuanced about how we talk about digital footprints, because yes, you should be very careful about
Mm-hmm.
what you put into
Yeah.
digital form, but it's not the end of the world for something to get out there. Reputation.com or whatever, right? Like there are certain services that can kind of handle your online reputation. You can, and you know, how long will it be until like personal branding is a course that we teach in high school?
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's definitely being taught by influencers that
yeah,
you can
yeah,
just buy their courses. I mean, I've taken courses in personal branding that were not accredited courses. They were just
yeah.
people. I mean, again, like anybody can create content and share it online. And
Yeah. And our
yeah.
students are learning about personal branding from YouTube, which
Hmm.
is like, I think it's something crazy, like 95% of students go on YouTube every day,
Yeah.
right? Like this is their like prime source of information, prime source of inspiration, right? And there's some amazing stuff that happens there. And that's why, again, this is
Hmm.
about staying safe and building community, right? So it's like my daughter goes on YouTube and she learns how to knit,
Hmm.
right? And she like learns how to like do all these little crafty things. She also checks out stuff about Taylor Swift. And then at the dinner table the other day, she came down and she like kind of shared some like other celebrity news with us. And we're like, how'd you learn about that? And that's the like algorithm that got her
Putting it in front of her. Yep.
one step
Hmm.
away from Taylor Swift. And now it's about this thing. And then what's at the end of that, right, is probably some like weird kind of like image stuff about like what you should look like as a woman or whatever, the
Hmm.
thing that we've been trying to protect against by like modulating the types of things that she has access to. And we took that opportunity to talk about algorithm, right? To
Hmm.
talk about the fact that like it noticed you liked Taylor Swift. So it gave you something that maybe is a little bit different, a little bit more extreme, like in a direction that they're trying to like push you so that your eyeballs stay on YouTube more. And she's at the age, she's 11, she can start to understand that kind of stuff. And so when we teach about digital citizenship in general, you asked about like what we say to adults, because I think adults are a huge part of the problem here, right?
Hmm.
Like, because this experiment of social media, this is being done to us
Hmm.
by multi-billion dollar companies. We adults are an active part of this experiment. We are engaging with these devices with very little forethought, with very little understanding of how they work. And interesting, like the how you like drag down on the feed to like get it to refresh,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's a slot machine,
Yeah. It
right? That's
really
that's
is.
right.
Yeah.
That's that same psychological mechanism of like slot machine. Oh, look, I won again with more dopamine hits,
Or
right?
more hearts, more
Yeah.
comments.
Yeah, more
I
engagement.
have a mixed reaction to comments. Sometimes it's anxiety. Like I have to respond to these or what
Oh,
are they
God.
saying?
Yeah. But our message is you need to come to these decisions, to these behaviors with some intentionality. It's
Hmm.
not about knowing exactly what the right things to do are. It's about knowing why you have chosen to do these things. And if you can do that, you're way ahead of the game. Because ultimately, these are issues of citizenship. They are not clear cut. It's not that there are a set of principles that are right and a set of principles that are wrong. It's that there are a lot of choices out there. And if you come to those choices and don't think about why you're making them, then someone else is making those choices for you.
Hmm.
But if you can think about, why am I posting this particular thing? Who's it for? Um, do I think it's okay to post pictures of my kid online or not? Right? Do I have rules about my own usage of technology that are different from the rules that I give my kid? Why are they different? What am
Hmm.
I expecting to see from them before I know that they're able to make the same decisions that I make? Right? Like, so
Yeah.
stuff like that, trying to get
Yeah.
people to simply bring some consciousness to it, simply like hold up a mirror, look at it, understand why you're doing what you're doing. And if it's your choice to like still spend 3 hours a day on Instagram, Like, just know that that's your choice.
Right.
And that the reason you're doing that is because it's giving you this and this and this, right? Like that can be fine as long as you know why you're doing it.
I'm going to take a quick break here to talk about the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers design programming and interventions to support students' executive functioning in school settings. Social skills groups are often seen as the entire intervention, and when they're delivered this way, they're often done in an academic format where an adult is leading the session and kids are answering questions or discussing various social rules and scenarios. This is a very small piece of what needs to happen. When we think of social skills intervention as just a lesson plan or social skills group, kids get really good at answering questions about how they should be acting in hypothetical situations. However, they often don't transfer any of those things over to real life. This is because real social interactions are not academic situations. We're actually not working on the skills preventing kids from using the information and knowledge we're trying to give them. In other words, we're not building the executive functioning skills kids need to be successful in social situations, not to mention other areas of life. Before you can successfully implement social skills intervention, you need to have a solid understanding of what executive functioning is, both the internal skills and the external behaviors, what successful intervention looks like and who needs to be involved, and what service delivery models can effectively address executive functioning. This is exactly what I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership. In the program, you'll learn why kids continue to experience anxiety or behavioral challenges even though they're going to therapy or have a behavior plan, common mistakes multidisciplinary teams make when teaching executive functioning, and how to correct these mistakes, why kids struggle with problem solving and friendships even though they're going to pull out therapy and social skills groups, and most importantly, how to help your team work together to figure out solutions to all of these things. If you are in a related service provider role, if you're a speech pathologist, social worker, counselor, psychologist, occupational therapist, or other professional on a school team supporting students, you can emerge into a leadership role on your team and help to guide these interventions. I help you do that in the School of Clinical Leadership. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard. Like I definitely am addicted to my phone. I mean, I know that if I don't put my phone somewhere and say intentionally I'm not going to look at it, I will catch myself just being like, "Oh, I need to practice Duolingo. Wait, why am I on Instagram right now? This is not why I picked up my phone." I do that all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
It's like
It's
my
almost as if they designed it so that you would have to do that.
yeah. I know that Instagram, that pink Instagram icon is just so pretty and enticing. I've thought about I'm like, what if I went back to the flip phone? I kind of miss the days when you could just text. And I had my calendar was I had this phone that the calendar didn't even have enough memory for all my stuff because it wasn't an iPhone. I don't know if I want to go that far back, but yeah, I mean, I've considered, you can do all sorts of things for yourself to monitor your own device use, but then
Yeah.
I think there's the conversation of how do you handle it for kids. And so I know we talked about this before, and I've heard some interesting analogies about social media. So it's interesting how, so I remember during the pandemic, I was listening to an interview with Vivek Murthy, and he had just written his book Together, where he actually wrote it before the pandemic. And it was about, I think he was working with like in hospice, and he was talking about just people having a sense of belonging. And he was talking all about how, on Instagram, it's the highlight reel. And I think we didn't originally realize that you're getting someone's highlight reel. It took us a couple years, maybe even longer, to realize that, hey, social media isn't real. You're not getting the true picture of someone's life. You're just getting the things that they choose to post online. But even then, he said, well, yes, there are a lot of things, ways that social media skews how we feel. And so if we, obviously, if we let kids have devices and access to social media without having those conversations with them, then they're going to be feeling those things that we're all feeling as well. But then he still said, but then there are some benefits. So we can use these devices and these mediums intentionally. But then the conversation's changed in the last year, really. I know like Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, his book is, I see it all over. And it's really ironic that it's talking about the harms of social media and I'm finding out about it on social media.
Yeah.
So that just seems weird.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've heard it compared to cigarettes. And I'm wondering if that's a good analogy, or do we maybe more want to think about it like driving a vehicle? I mean, driving a vehicle can be dangerous, but we're probably not going to start, like most of us aren't going to stop driving our vehicles.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
More dangerous than driving a vehicle, not as dangerous as cigarettes. How's that?
Yeah, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I mean, I think the cigarette analogy is close. Um, but I do believe that there are good things that can happen with
Mhm.
social media, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
during
absolutely.
the pandemic, I kind of dove into LinkedIn a little bit, and I
Hmm.
met some people on there that I to this day am connected with,
Yep.
and
Same
saw
here.
at ISTE and gave him a hug because like we know each other, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, the I think that a good rule of thumb with students and social media use is that first of all, the younger they are, the less sense it makes.
Yeah,
For me
absolutely.
personally, I think I'm looking at like probably like 16 before I'm getting
Hmm.
my daughter a smartphone.
Yeah.
But I think
Hmm.
that there are things that I might see from her before she's 16 that might suggest to me that she's ready.
Hmm.
And some of the things that you need in order to be able to make some good decisions about social media come down to some executive functioning skills, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
are you able to put this thing down? Right? Like, can you have something that is, sort of empty calorie fun for a certain amount of time and then decide to put it down and you're
Hmm.
okay when you've
Yeah.
done that, right? How is she feeling about herself as like a young woman, right? Like how is she comparing herself to her peers? Is she feeling like a solid sense of self
Hmm.
where even if she were to interact with the highlight reel of other teens her age, she'd be able to withstand that pressure and see that like her sense of self is who she is rather than being drawn into trying to either become someone that she's not or like feel compelled to like prove something about
Hmm.
herself via social media. These are the types of conversations that I would want to have with her. And so, what I mean to say there is that there are sort of these age cutoffs and you can look at
Yeah.
it that way.
Yeah.
But there's also like what do I think I need to have a functional relationship with social media? And do I see those qualities in this person who I'm deciding whether or not I want to give that access to? So that's
Hmm.
one thing. And then the other thing is that you can, ease them into it, right? Like you can
Hmm.
give them a TikTok account and then make it so that whenever they're on TikTok, they're doing it with you,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And like have that first kind of exposure to that where it's like, oh, look at what this is like. Who do you think put this out there? Why did this come into our algorithm? We never searched for anything like that before. Why do you think it's in there? Do you like it? Interesting. Do you like one of the things I practice with my social media because I like Reddit. That's my
Hmm.
I just think it's a great service if you like
It's interesting for
curate it
sure. Yeah, you
if you
definitely have to
curate it
curate
right.
it.
Yeah, and so I practice social media hygiene, right? Like my Instagram feed is like sports stuff, people doing amazing things, beautiful places, like yummy food and yeah, comedy. right? Like that's like basically what's on there. And then at this
Hmm.
point, I don't even know if I follow any people I know anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's just like it's inspiring, right? And but then every once in a while, the algorithm like kicks something in there and my eye lingers on it for a little bit too long, and then it gives me more of that kind of stuff. And so I kind of have to go through and be like, don't show me this, don't show me this, don't show me
Yeah.
this. Like,
You almost have to intentionally, I mean, unfollow or
mhm,
mute or follow specific things so that you get more of
yeah,
it. I've noticed that on Instagram specifically, it's they really are pushing accounts in front of you that are accounts that you don't follow.
yeah,
All of my whole Instagram feed right now is hip mobility and like knee rehab exercises
yeah.
all over
Oh,
my feed.
I'm 3 weeks behind you. I'm getting surgery in 3 weeks.
Well, the algorithm will show you what it thinks that you want if you start
Yeah,
clicking on those things. I did find a physical therapist that way online though, so we'll see how that goes. I just
yeah.
started with her today. So,
All right, on.
again, there's some utility there. I think the
Yeah.
algorithm put her in front of me. And
Uh-huh.
what I liked about her was that she looked like a normal human. It wasn't like my makeup is perfect, even though I just
Uh,
worked out, kind of a
uh,
thing, which is what you get a lot of, which again, like you said, that just the highlight reel.
yeah, yeah. And so, having it's about having these conversations, right? It's about
Yeah.
knowing that that's what the algorithm's doing. It's about like taking ownership back, taking control back.
Hmm.
And this is not just for adults as they model for kids, but it's also the conversations you should be having with kids as you're preparing them to become adults.
Yeah. I I I like the 16 as the I don't want to say cutoff, because like you said, there could be kids that could show that they have the skills that where they can handle it.
And
But
vice
then
versa. There can be
yeah, and
16-year-olds who are not ready.
yeah, there's probably some adults who still aren't ready, but that doesn't stop them from being on there. It's well, and with going back, I know we've been talking about kids, but when you think about distance learning and professional development, which is what I do, and again, my whole company exists because of social media. I mean, I do Facebook ads and promote online, and I also have a Facebook group associated with one of my programs, and so that's part of how I support students, which again is not the only way that I do it. I have other options, but the thing that's nice about a Facebook group is that it gives a forum for people to get the notifications on a platform that they're already on. But I have some people who are like, I want to join, but can I still ask questions if I'm not on Facebook? Because some people have just given up social media. And so,
Yeah.
it's flexible. I have other options as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some benefits, but I think with the adults and the distance learning for adults as far as professional development, it's so interesting how on one hand you can connect with people all over. You can learn so much about how, I mean, even in special ed with the legal aspect, how I used to think like, oh, I didn't think this exactly, but I didn't have a full awareness of how everything isn't like it is in Illinois. Like there's other states
Mhm.
and other things that people are struggling with that are completely different because the state guidelines are
Yeah.
different in other states. And so you would never have that if you didn't have these online forums. But then at the same time, you also see how people interact differently with each other than they would if they were in a face-to-face conference, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, there's different rules about these things, different rules of engagement, and that's another thing that we talk about. I mean, they're constantly evolving. They're different in different types of groups, and again, it's about noticing things, right? It's about like taking a step back and asking yourself like, what are the rules of engagement in this particular forum? Like what do these people care about, or what are their assumptions versus this other forum over here?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and so this all speaks to the opportunity that technology affords to people. And I think that despite the dangers, there it would be irresponsible for educators to ignore
Mm-hmm.
these potential benefits. Um, the only possible potential benefit of smoking cigarettes, I guess, is looking cool to certain people,
Yeah.
right? Like it
That
does
was the
not
original.
have, right? It does not
Yeah.
have the utility that technology does.
Hmm.
Even social media specifically, it does not have that same utility. But it's a different, it's a, it's a monster, right? Like it's
Hmm.
also hardwired into like the human experience in a way that smoking isn't, right? Like we are social beings. We have been for the entirety of the existence of our species. We've been depending on social acceptance in order to survive because, you if you get kicked out of your community and, throughout human history, like that meant death. And
Hmm.
so messing with that through like amplifying the exposure by changing the language of approval into these like binary like likes versus not likes or
Yeah.
taking the humanity out of the conversation by making it text based instead of like getting the full human
Hmm. Yeah.
feedback.
The
Like so much of the
nonverbal. Yeah.
yeah so much of the meaning of what we're saying is not in our words, it's in our tone of voice, it's in our eyes and the emotion that we're betraying. And so there are things to be like very, very careful of. And again, it's about drawing awareness to all of this stuff.
Yeah. I think the taking the nonverbal out, and I think that was it was challenging for the students who learned so many things online and didn't get the opportunity to learn how you would pay attention to some of those things in person. So that was, problematic, kind of going back to some of the kids who were very young during the pandemic when they would have had their first school
Yeah.
experience. But I think that you do, I mean, I find even though with my job now, for example, I work mostly remote, but there are certain things that we plan in person because it's just not the same when you do things online all the time, just from a relationship building standpoint. And there's certain meetings that are difficult to have because the format was originally designed to be in person. But then there's other times when it actually makes more sense to do things virtually from a practical standpoint. Um, I mean, I even think about just like how people engage differently in like a web call versus in person, and some people engage more in one forum versus the other.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so that's really interesting. I know that you've had a lot of conversations on your podcast about the equity piece and the access piece. And so there's the access piece of geography, right? Like we're we live far apart and we're able to have this conversation, and kids might be able to interact with someone in a place where they've never traveled before. So that's one obvious access piece, which is really important for kids in districts where there might be transportation issues. For example, they might be able to be exposed to something that they wouldn't normally have learned about. But what about from a standpoint of students with disabilities and just equity from that standpoint? I mean, I'm curious. I know you've had a lot of people on your podcast and just some of the things that you've seen become possible with some of these technologies.
Yeah, the equity piece is huge in distance learning, not just about providing access to educational opportunities at all for some
Hmm.
students, right? So, like in terms of disabilities, a student who is like medically like can't come into a school,
Yeah.
right? Like
Hmm.
for whatever reason, like online provides an opportunity for them to actually have a school experience rather than just not being able to at all.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, there's an episode of Why Distance Learning where we interview the father of a girl who's deaf and hard of hearing, and she is able to have so many more experiences using distance learning than she would be able to in person because we are able to provide supports for the distance learning format where you actually have like subtitles on the
Hmm.
screen,
Yeah.
right? Of like that's something that you can't have in a real classroom, right? Like that is a difficult thing to replicate. But if you're in a video based format, you already have that video up, it's easy to just insert that in there. Closed captioning is another one of those things. You can have and this is, where it's about access again, right? Like, let's say you live in a rural area and you want someone who knows American Sign Language to come to class to be able to, interpret something that's going on in the classroom. Maybe it's some kind of special event, but that American Sign Language person is located 100 miles away, or
Yeah,
right,
that's a
like,
huge with
right. So,
interpreters. It's so hard to
uh-huh.
find interpreters.
Yeah, so an American
Hmm.
Sign Language interpreter being able to go from this corner of the state to that corner of the state to that corner of the state to that corner of the
Hmm.
state just by turning off one Zoom call and turning on another Zoom call, like that is extremely powerful. Um, and and it's the same story everywhere. It's like, what is the experience that you want a student to have? Is that available in their geographic area? Maybe. If it's not, here we go. Right?
Hmm.
Like this technology can bring in anything you want, any experience you want. And like a student, let's say, who, like, an argument I got into over the weekend, actually, a
That's
kindergarten
funny.
teacher, who she was insisting, she was like, we don't want a virtual field trip to a farm. We want our kids to go to that farm. And I'm
Right.
like, yeah, have those kids go to that farm. What about the kids who live in inner city Chicago? Right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
what about the kids who, like, they're not getting it on a bus and going to a farm? So yeah, have the IRL experience if you can have the IRL experience for many of these things. But if you
Hmm.
can't for whatever reason, whether it's geographic location, whether it's ability, whether it's access to an expert, we have this technology to be able to redefine what the limitations of your situation are, right? To eliminate those barriers. And in
Hmm.
that way, it's incredibly powerful when embraced, right? You have to embrace it for what it can do. I there are some students that being online is going to be like the best solution for them. Even those students, turn off the computer, get outside, like, go do some normal IRL stuff. Like, no one is arguing that we should
Hmm.
be putting students in front of screens 24/7 for the sake of something,
Hmm.
like, we
Yeah.
what we are saying is that this is a tool. You can use this tool to accentuate, to complement, to improve, to redefine what you're doing today in your classroom, and then it's a tool that maybe you don't use tomorrow, and then you use it again the next day, right? Like it's your discretion, but know that it's a tool. Know that emergency learning that happened during COVID, that's not what this is.
Hmm.
Be more educated as to, like, what the possibilities are, and then decide which of those work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. The access is really important because I mean, it kind of goes the other way around too with kids in rural areas where
Yeah.
a lot of times transportation could be a huge issue and those kids deserve to have those experiences too. And it's I think sometimes you can explore and do research using some of the online tools because maybe at some point you do decide. I mean, how many people decided to travel somewhere because they saw videos
Yeah.
of what it looked like when they
Hmm.
like if they were to travel to a certain country or found out information online about it or I mean there's all I mean travel blogs are huge. I mean and it's you can find so much information about other areas and yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
so many different
There's
things.
Yeah, we interviewed someone at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and she was talking about this kid who was like a super fan of their paleontology department, and like actually came from like Oklahoma to Denver to like
Wow,
go to the
that's
museum,
so
and
cool.
like walked into their, like, paleontology area, and was, um basically, like, was inspired by the virtual field trip to make an IRL field trip, and now, like, is a future paleontologist, right? Like,
Mhm.
and it's not going to work that way every time for every kid, but
Mhm.
part of the purpose of education is exposure. Why not expose them to more things?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So, I know that you have a lot of great interviews. Where can people go to learn more about some of the programs that you offer or learn more about your podcasts?
Yeah, so go to banyangloballearning.com, Banyan like the banyan tree, and you will find out a lot about our company, what we do, the different live virtual programs that are available, some teacher training, in addition to the curriculum that we've built for our daily distance learning program abroad. Um, and then my podcasts are available in all the podcast places. Make It
Yep.
Mindful and Education Podcast. That's the name of one of them. And Why Distance Learning ? Is the name of the other one.
Great. Well, we'll link to all those in the show notes.
Oh, and also CILC.org/podcast. That's the website for the Wide Distance Learning one. And the
Okay.
Center for Interactive Learning and Collaboration, if you're interested in virtual programs, they're a great place to go. We are a content provider that's listed on their site. They've got hundreds of content providers, lots of museums from across the country. Basically, if you're an educator or a homeschool parent, or if you just want to, if you want to learn for yourself,
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff. You can just search by topic and find it. They've got a database and again, hundreds of content providers that do a lot of really unique and amazing things.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And check out my podcast. I like it. I recently had a guest named Karen Dudek-Brannan. That was fantastic. We talked about executive functioning. You should listen.
Yes. Awesome. We'll link to that one too.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all the resources that were mentioned in this episode. And be sure to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers put executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams using multiple service delivery models. So I show you how to do direct intervention, and I also show you how to coach and train others so that you can ensure students get support across their day. Remember that it helps me so much if you tell your friends and colleagues about De Facto Leaders, and if you follow me and leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify or another podcast network. And finally, if you're interested in collaborating with me, if you'd like to invite me to be on your podcast, if you would like to be a guest on De Facto Leaders, or if you have a suggestion for a guest for De Facto Leaders, please email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.